I wasn't supposed to hear the words that changed my life, but when the doctor looked at me like he was already grieving, I knew something inside me was terribly, terrifyingly wrong. I never imagined my life would split into two parts, the time before the diagnosis, and everything that came after. People talk about moments that change everything as if they're grand, dramatic events with violins playing in the background, but mine wasn't like that. It was a Tuesday morning, too early, too cold, too ordinary to hold anything life-altering. I was sitting in a nearly empty waiting room, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, feeling annoyed that the appointment was already running 20 minutes late. I didn't feel sick. I didn't look sick. I wasn't even supposed to be there, it was just a follow-up, a routine check after a stubborn cough that had come and gone. Nothing serious. Nothing worth stressing about. I remember thinking about what I'd cook for dinner. I remember adjusting my sleeve, because the air conditioning in the clinic was always too strong. I remember the receptionist calling my name, her voice flat and cheerful at the same time, like every clinic receptionist everywhere. And I remember standing up without the slightest idea that the version of me walking into that room would not be the same person walking out. The doctor didn't smile when I entered. Normally he did. Normally he made some small joke about the weather or asked about my week. But this time he just nodded and told me to sit down. His eyes were tired, as if he hadn't slept, or as if he had rehearsed what he was about to say and still wasn't ready to say it. Something tightened in my chest that had nothing to do with my physical health. I tried to brush off the feeling, telling myself I was overthinking. Doctors are tired all the time, that's normal. But then he opened my file, took a deep breath, and looked at me with the kind of heaviness that makes your skin grow cold before you even know why. "We found something," he said. My heart didn't drop. It didn't race. It just paused. A small, confused pause, like my mind hadn't gotten the instructions for how to react yet. He explained slowly, carefully, choosing each word as if one misplaced syllable could break me. A shadow on the scan. Abnormal growth. Unusual activity. He spoke in medical terms that sounded distant, unreal, like they were meant for someone else. I felt myself drifting slightly, detaching from my own body, as if it were safer to hover above the room than sit inside it. I asked him what it meant. He hesitated before answering, and that hesitation said more than any diagnosis could. He talked about further tests, specialists, possibilities, none of which sounded simple. I felt like the walls were inching closer with every sentence he said. There are moments when you feel your life narrowing, shrinking into a single point of fear, and for me, that point was his quiet voice saying, "We need to take this seriously." When he finally finished talking, I nodded as if I understood, though I wasn't sure I'd absorbed anything after the first sentence. My hands were cold. My throat felt tight. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, too loud and too steady for someone who had just been told their life might be in danger. I walked out of his office in a daze, the hallway stretching longer than it ever had before, the fluorescent lights buzzing louder than usual. I kept expecting someone to stop me and tell me there had been a mistake, that he'd mixed up my results with someone else's, that everything was fine. Nobody did. Outside, the world looked the same. Cars passed. People talked on their phones. A mother scolded her child for stepping into a puddle. Life kept moving as if mine hadn't just slammed into a wall. I stood there on the sidewalk, clutching my phone like a lifeline, trying to swallow the rising panic. Who do you call first when you're not even sure what you're telling them? What do you say? How do you turn fear into words? In that moment, I realized something quietly horrifying. I didn't want to call anyone. Not yet. Not because I didn't need support, but because saying it out loud would make it real. As long as it stayed in my head, in that cold, sterile office, it felt like something temporary, a misunderstanding waiting to be cleared up. But deep down, I already knew my life had just changed. I just didn't know how much. The rest of the day unraveled in fragments, like a film reel missing frames. I remember walking without knowing where I was going, my feet carrying me down familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. The city was loud, cars honked, someone was shouting into a phone, a dog barked at a passing skateboard. All of it felt too sharp, too alive, almost rude in its normalcy. My world had cracked open, yet everything around me kept spinning as if nothing had happened. After a while, I found myself sitting on a bench near the river, staring at the water moving in quiet, steady lines. It was strange how calming it looked. How indifferent. As if the river had seen 1,000 lives fall apart and still flowed the same way. I tried to gather my thoughts, to make sense of the words the doctor had used. Growth. Abnormal. Further testing. A shadow. The word shadow kept echoing in my mind, looping over itself. There was something terrifying about the idea of a shadow inside your own body, something dark lurking beneath skin and muscle where you couldn't reach it, couldn't see it, couldn't control it. I touched my chest, half expecting to feel something there, some sign, some clue. But there was nothing. Just the same body I had woken up in that morning, only now it felt like a stranger's. My phone buzzed with messages, friends asking if I wanted to grab dinner, a coworker sending a reminder, a family member forwarding a meme. All the small, mundane things that had filled my life just hours ago now felt distant, almost offensive in their simplicity. I stared at the screen without answering. What could I say? Sorry, can't come. Might be seriously ill. It felt absurd, like a line from a bad script. At some point, I realized my hands were shaking. Not violently, just a subtle tremor, like my body was expressing what my mind refused to. I closed my eyes and took a breath that caught halfway down my throat. I wasn't crying. Not yet. There was a strange numbness holding everything together, like my emotions hadn't received permission to break down. When I finally stood up from the bench, the sky had turned a dull gray, heavy with the threat of rain. I walked home slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. My apartment greeted me with the usual stillness, shoes by the door, coat on the chair, the faint scent of coffee lingering from the morning. But it felt different, darker somehow. As if the air itself sensed something had shifted. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall for a long time. My thoughts kept bouncing between fear and denial. It's probably nothing, I whispered out loud, testing the words, hoping they would sound convincing. They didn't. I tried again. Lots of people get scary test results. It doesn't mean it's serious. Still no comfort. The fear underneath the denial was too solid, too real. Eventually, I opened my laptop and typed the words I had been avoiding, abnormal growth and scan. I shouldn't have. Everyone says not to. But fear makes you reckless, and curiosity mixed with terror is a dangerous thing. Within minutes, the screen was filled with articles, medical forums, worst-case scenarios. Words like malignant, biopsy, treatment options. My stomach twisted painfully. I slammed the laptop shut, as if that could erase what I had seen. That's when the first tear fell. Just one, sliding down my cheek, warm and heavy. It surprised me. Then another came, then another, until suddenly I was shaking, my breath coming in shallow gasps, my hands gripping the sheets like they were the only thing keeping me grounded. The reality I had been pushing away all day finally crashed through whatever wall I had tried to build. I cried for the life I was terrified to lose, for the future that suddenly felt uncertain, for the version of myself who had walked into the clinic that morning without knowing what waited on the other side. When the tears finally slowed, I felt drained, empty, almost hollow. But in that emptiness, a strange clarity settled. I couldn't keep this to myself forever. I needed someone to know. Someone to sit beside me in the fear instead of letting it swallow me alone. My hand moved to my phone again. My thumb hovered over a name, someone I trusted, someone who knew me better than most. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. Once I told them, the words would become real in a way they weren't yet. For a long moment, my thumb didn't move. Then, with a shaky breath, I pressed the call button. The phone rang longer than it usually did. Long enough for doubt to crawl up my spine and whisper that maybe I should hang up, maybe I wasn't ready to say the words out loud. But just before the call could go to voicemail, the line clicked, and I heard a familiar voice. Hey, everything okay? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. Hearing that simple question, one I'd answered so casually 1,000 times, hit me harder than I expected. My silence must have said enough, because their tone softened instantly. You sound off. What happened? I took a shaky breath. My throat felt tight, like the words were too heavy to push through. I had a doctor's appointment, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. And something showed up on the scan. There was a pause on the other end. Not dramatic. Not surprised. Just a quiet moment where I knew they were choosing their words carefully. What did they say? My fingers curled into the blanket beside me. They don't know yet. They think it could be something serious. I have to do more tests. I swallowed hard. He said there was a shadow. Another silence. Then, gently, do you want me to come over? The offer made something inside me crumble a little. I almost said no, that old instinct to handle everything alone, to keep my problems neatly tucked away where no one else could touch them. But I didn't want to be alone. Not tonight. Not with this. Yes, I said quietly. Please. They didn't ask questions. They didn't hesitate. I'm on my way. I hung up and stared at my phone, feeling both relief and dread. Letting someone into this fear felt like opening the door to something wild and unpredictable. But it also felt necessary. The minutes stretched painfully long until I heard the knock at my door. When I opened it, they stood there with that familiar worried crease between their brows, the one that always appeared when something was wrong. They stepped inside and closed the door gently, as if any loud sound might shatter me further. Come here, they said softly. I didn't resist. I sank into their arms, and for a moment, the steady rhythm of another heartbeat beside mine reminded me that I wasn't drifting alone in the dark. They didn't try to fix anything. They didn't offer false optimism. They just held me while the reality of the day pressed harder against my chest. After a while, we sat on the couch. They kept one hand wrapped around mine, their thumb moving in slow circles across my skin, grounding me. Tell me everything, they said. So I did. I told them about the doctor's expression, the cold echo of the word shadow, the way the river looked too calm while my mind was sinking. I told them about the fear I didn't want to admit, the way my thoughts turned dark the moment I was alone with them. The words spilled out messily, unevenly, but I didn't hold anything back. They listened quietly, only nodding occasionally, never interrupting. When I finally ran out of things to say, they squeezed my hand. You don't have to go through this alone, they said. Whatever comes next, I'm here. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to absorb the certainty in their voice. But part of me whispered that promises like that were easy to make on a quiet evening when nothing had truly begun yet. It was the unknown, the days of waiting, the tests, the possible answers, that terrified me. The things no one could protect me from. What if it's the worst? I asked. Saying it made my chest feel tight. They took a deep breath. Then we face it. Together. The word together made something inside me twist painfully. I had always thought of myself as self-sufficient, someone who solved their own problems, carried their own weight. But now, sitting in this room, staring at a future that had cracked open into a dozen terrifying possibilities, I realized how desperately I didn't want to face any of this alone. We talked for a while longer, about the next steps, the tests I needed to schedule, the questions I should ask the doctor. They wrote things down so I wouldn't forget, practical things that felt impossible to think about when my mind kept spinning in fear. At some point, I leaned my head against their shoulder. I'm scared, I admitted, the words raw and fragile. I know, they whispered. But you're still you. This doesn't change that. I closed my eyes, letting their presence steady me. But in the back of my mind, a quiet dread pulsed, the growing fear that the person I was, the life I had built, was already slipping through my fingers. I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. but I felt it. And part of me wondered if this was just the beginning of losing pieces of myself I didn't even know were fragile. The night passed in fragments, shallow sleep, sudden awakenings, the kind of restless turning that leaves the sheets tangled and your mind exhausted. Every time I drifted off, I jolted awake with the same intrusive thought: what if the shadow was growing while I slept? Irrational, maybe, but fear makes unreasonable things feel painfully logical. By morning, the faint optimism I had managed to hold on to the night before had thinned into something fragile and brittle. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mug between my hands. The steam rose in thin, wavering lines, but I barely registered the warmth. My thoughts spiraled in tight, suffocating loops: test results, possibilities, treatments, worst-case scenarios. The sense of control I usually clung to felt like sand slipping through my fingers. I didn't know how to anchor myself. A quiet knock at the door made me flinch. When I opened it, they were standing there again, holding 2 paper bags and looking at me like I might collapse at any moment. "I brought breakfast," they said, their tone gentle but steady. I stepped aside, and they walked in without needing an invitation. "You didn't have to come this early," I said, though the truth was I felt relief settle in my chest the moment they crossed the threshold. "I know," they replied. "But I figured you shouldn't be alone today." We ate in silence. Or rather, they ate, and I pushed food around my plate without much interest. Every sound felt amplified: the scrape of a fork, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Each noise reminded me of how normal mornings used to feel, and how far I had drifted from that world. Eventually, they set their fork down and leaned forward. "You need to call the specialist," they said. "Sooner is better." I nodded, though the thought of picking up the phone made my stomach tighten. I wasn't ready to hear more medical terms, more careful tones, more uncertainty disguised as professionalism. But I knew they were right. Waiting wouldn't make the truth any less real. "I'll call after I shower," I said, mostly to delay the moment. When I stood under the hot water, I pressed my palms against the cool tile wall and let the steam surround me. For a few seconds, I let myself pretend everything was fine, that the bone-deep tension in my muscles was just exhaustion, that the heaviness in my chest was just stress. But denial is like a fog that thins the moment you reach out to touch it. The moment I stepped out of the shower, the fear settled back onto me like a second skin. I dialed the number with trembling fingers. The receptionist answered cheerfully, completely unaware of the panic tangled in my voice. She offered the earliest appointment for additional scans and a consultation, 2 days from now. 2 days suddenly felt like an eternity. After the call, I sank onto the couch. They sat beside me, not too close, not too far, just enough for me to feel their presence. 2 days, I said, trying to sound composed. It came out shaky. "We'll get through those 2 days, they replied. 1 hour at a time if we have to." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that time could be broken into small, manageable pieces instead of looming over me like an avalanche waiting to fall. But the truth was that fear made time behave strangely, too fast, too slow, always wrong. Every hour felt both endless and insufficient. The first real shift came that afternoon. I was standing by the window, staring out at the street below, when a sudden wave of panic hit me so hard I had to grip the windowsill to stay upright. My breath shortened, my chest tightened, and the room blurred at the edges. It felt like something inside me was clawing for escape. They were at my side instantly. "Hey, breathe. Look at me." I tried, but my lungs refused to cooperate. Tears stung my eyes, frustration mixing with fear. "I can't," the words dissolved into a broken gasp. They took my hands, holding them firmly, grounding me. "You're okay," they said softly. "Slow breaths. In through your nose. Out through your mouth." I followed their voice, shaky and uneven at first, but eventually the room stopped tilting. The air seeped back into my lungs, painfully but steadily. When I finally met their eyes, something in their expression made my throat tighten, not pity, but worry. Real, raw worry. "This isn't just about the diagnosis," they said quietly. "You've been carrying too much for too long." I looked away. They weren't wrong. Even before this, I had been pushing myself, convincing myself I didn't need help, that everything was fine as long as I kept moving. The diagnosis, or the possibility of one, had just cracked the surface and revealed how fragile everything underneath had always been. "I don't want to be weak," I whispered. "You're not weak," they said. "You're scared." Anyone would be. Their words settled into me like a truth I had been avoiding for years. I had always equated needing support with weakness, leaning on someone with failure. But now, faced with something I couldn't outrun or outwork, I realized that strength wasn't about pretending. It was about surviving the moments that threatened to break you. As the day faded into evening, the fear didn't vanish, but it shifted. It became something I could look at instead of something that swallowed me whole. Maybe it was their presence, or maybe it was the first step toward acceptance, but something inside me loosened just enough to let the smallest fragment of resilience slip through. Still, as night settled over the apartment, one thought pulsed quietly in the back of my mind, steady and haunting. If the shadow inside me was real, if this was something serious, then the next days wouldn't just test my body. They would test every part of my life I had ever taken for granted. The next morning, I woke with the uneasy sense that something was wrong before I was even fully conscious. It wasn't pain, not physical pain at least. It was an emotional heaviness that settled into my chest the moment I opened my eyes, the kind that made the rest of the world feel slightly out of focus. The room looked the same, shadows on the wall, sunlight creeping through the curtains, but I didn't feel the same. I couldn't pretend anymore. I was living inside the uncertainty now, a place where every thought had a sharp edge. I tried to go about my morning as if things were normal. I made coffee, opened the curtains, even turned on the radio to fill the silence with something other than my own thoughts. But every small action felt foreign, like I was imitating the person I used to be instead of actually being them. The reflection in the kitchen window looked like me, but there was a tightness in my expression I didn't recognize, an awareness that hadn't been there before. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. It was my manager. Are you coming in today? For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Work. Deadlines. Meetings. The world I had been part of before all this. It felt impossible, absurd even, to think about stepping into that office and pretending everything was fine when my life was balancing on a knife's edge. I typed a few words, deleted them, tried again. I'm not feeling well. Might need a few days. A few seconds later, another message came through. Okay. Get well soon. Short. Polite. Unaware. And yet it left me with a sinking feeling. If this turned out to be something serious, those few days could turn into weeks, months, or something even harder to admit. My job had always been the one part of my life that felt stable. Reliable. Something I could control. Now even that felt shaky. I put the phone down and tried to distract myself by cleaning, but my thoughts kept circling back to the appointment. 2 days felt like a lifetime. Time wasn't moving at a normal pace anymore, every hour stretched into fear-soaked minutes, and every minute felt like waiting for a storm I could already feel in the air. By early afternoon, the emotional weight felt so heavy that I couldn't sit still. I decided to go for a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. The city streets were busier than yesterday, people rushing to appointments, carrying groceries, jogging with headphones on. I envied them. Not because their lives were perfect, but because their lives were theirs. Predictable. Steady. Not hanging in the balance like mine. Halfway down the block, I felt a strange dizziness wash over me. Not enough to collapse, just enough to make the world tilt slightly. I grabbed a nearby railing and waited for it to pass. Maybe it was the lack of sleep. Maybe the stress. Or maybe the shadow inside me already had more influence than I wanted to admit. The moment the thought crossed my mind, fear shot through me, sharp and cold. Hey, are you alright? Someone asked behind me. I turned to see an older woman watching me with concern. I forced a small smile. Just lightheaded. She nodded sympathetically. Stress will do that. Don't push yourself too hard. I thanked her and kept walking. Her words shouldn't have meant anything, but they lodged themselves in my chest. Don't push yourself too hard. I'd spent most of my life doing exactly that, working through exhaustion, ignoring warning signs, pretending everything was fine even when it wasn't. Maybe this shadow, whatever it was, had been trying to get my attention for months, maybe years. Maybe I had been too busy to notice. When I returned home, they were already there, sitting on the couch with a worried crease in their forehead. You didn't answer my messages, they said softly. I went for a walk, I replied, avoiding their eyes. Alone? Something in their tone made defensiveness rise in me. I just needed space. I get that, they said, but you scared me. I didn't know where you were. The concern in their voice was genuine, but it brushed up against the simmering frustration inside me. I can't be monitored every second, I snapped, sharper than I meant to. Their expression shifted, hurt, then something like caution. I'm not monitoring you. I'm trying to help. I sighed, rubbing my forehead. I know. Everything feels like too much. They reached out but didn't touch me until I nodded. Their hand found mine, warm and steady. You don't have to deal with every emotion at once, they said. Let them come. Let them pass. Don't fight everything alone. But I was fighting everything alone. Even with them beside me, even with support, it felt like the real battle was happening inside my body, hidden beneath skin and bone where no one could reach it. The uncertainty gnawed at me constantly. Was the shadow small? Was it growing? Was it dangerous? Was it something benign? Every thought wrestled with the next until I felt raw and restless. The low point came that evening when I received another message from work. Can you send the files from last week? We need them today. Just like that, reality intruded again, the version of my life where I was expected to function, deliver, perform. The version that didn't know my world had shifted. I stared at the message for a long time, something inside me cracking open. I couldn't focus on files. I couldn't pretend I was fine. I couldn't keep living like nothing had changed. I can't do this, I whispered. They looked up from across the room. Can't do what? This, I said, gesturing vaguely around me. Life. Work. Waiting. Pretending things are normal when they're not. They came over and knelt in front of me, taking my shaking hands in theirs. Then stop pretending, they said gently. Let yourself feel what you feel. You won't fall apart. And if you do, I'll be here to help you put yourself back together. Their words should have comforted me, but instead they broke something open. The tears came again, slow at first, then uncontrollable. This wasn't just about the shadow. It was about everything I had been holding together for years with sheer force of will. Every fear I had buried. Every moment I told myself I was fine when I wasn't. I cried until there was nothing left, until the exhaustion hollowed me out. They held me the whole time, silent and steady. When the tears finally stopped, a question whispered at the back of my mind, one I wasn't ready to face yet but knew would demand an answer eventually. What if the shadow wasn't the only thing inside me that needed to change? The next day began with an uneasy determination, the kind that comes not from confidence but from exhaustion. I had spent so much time spiraling, thinking, fearing, imagining every possible outcome, that a strange numbness settled over me. Not peace, not acceptance, just a temporary quiet in the chaos. I knew I couldn't stay in that emotional freefall forever. Something had to move. Even if it was a small step. I started the morning by making a list, questions for the specialist, symptoms I'd felt in the past weeks, appointments I needed to schedule. Putting things on paper made them feel tangible, manageable, even though the fear was still there, pulsing beneath the surface. It reminded me of the way sailors would mark stars to navigate the night. The sky was still dark, but at least there were points of reference. They watched me from across the table, a mix of relief and concern in their eyes. This is good, they said. Taking control where you can. I don't feel in control, I admitted, my pen trembling slightly between my fingers. You don't have to feel it for it to be true. Doing the steps is enough. Maybe they were right. Maybe doing something, anything, was better than letting my thoughts devour me whole. With the list finished, I made a second decision. I needed to tell someone else. Not everyone. Not the whole world. But someone who had been part of my life long enough to deserve honesty. I hesitated for a long time, scrolling through names, messages, old conversations. Every potential name brought a new fear, of pity, of awkwardness, of people treating me differently. But eventually, I chose my sibling. We weren't incredibly close, not in the traditional sense. We didn't talk every day, or even every week. But they were steady, grounded, the kind of person who didn't panic easily. I typed a simple message. Can we talk later? Something important. They responded almost immediately. Sure. Call me whenever. Just seeing that made my throat tighten. I wasn't ready to tell them yet, but knowing I had the option felt like a small anchor in the storm. The rest of the day stretched in a blur. I tried reading. I tried cleaning. I tried distracting myself with videos. Nothing stuck. My mind drifted back to the same loop. What if it's serious? What if the tests confirm it? What if my life changes beyond recognition? By early afternoon, the tension inside me had built so tightly that I decided to leave the apartment. This time, I didn't go alone, they insisted on coming. I didn't have the energy to argue. We walked through a quiet park, the kind with old trees and worn paths. The air was cool, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain. For a while, we didn't talk. The silence wasn't awkward, it was grounding, like the world itself was trying to steady me. Eventually, I broke the quiet. I keep thinking about everything I haven't done, I said. My voice cracked a little. Things I kept putting off because I thought I had time. They glanced at me, their expression soft. You still do. You don't know that. No, they admitted. But I know fear is stealing more from you right now than any diagnosis could. Their words hit harder than I expected. Fear was stealing everything, my peace, my appetite, my sleep, my sense of self. Even if the shadow turned out to be nothing, these days of uncertainty were carving into me, shaping me in ways I couldn't fully understand yet. We walked further, following the narrow path that wound around a small pond. The water rippled with the breeze, tiny circles forming and fading again. I watched them disappear, wishing my thoughts could dissolve the same way. At the far edge of the water, I stopped. The weight in my chest had grown too heavy to ignore. What if I can't handle this? I asked quietly. They stepped closer, their shoulder brushing against mine. You won't have to handle it alone. That's not what I mean. I swallowed hard. What if I fall apart? What if I'm not strong enough? Then fall apart, they said gently. Strength isn't never breaking. It's putting yourself back together afterward. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to see myself as someone capable of surviving whatever came next. But right then, all I could see was the fear, spreading like cracks in glass. We stayed there for a long moment, neither of us speaking. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves above us. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. A child laughed. Life continued, unaware of the storm gathering inside me. On the walk home, I decided to call my sibling. Not to tell them everything yet, but to hear a familiar voice, someone who had known me long before fear had reshaped me. When they answered, the softness in their tone reminded me of childhood, of scraped knees and whispered secrets under blankets. Hey, I said. Hey, they replied. What's going on? I hesitated, the truth pressing against my teeth. But I wasn't ready. Not fully. So I said the closest thing I could manage to honesty. I'm just going through something. I'll explain soon. Just needed to hear your voice. They didn't push. They never did. I'm here when you're ready, they said simply. After the call, a fragile peace settled over me, not resolution, not calm, but something lighter than the crushing fear of the past days. For the first time since the doctor's words hit me like a storm, I felt a tiny flicker of something I hadn't felt in a while. Not hope exactly. But possibility. A small, trembling possibility that maybe, no matter what the tests revealed, I wasn't facing the darkness alone. The night before the appointment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground would give way beneath me by morning. The hours stretched in long, aching stretches of silence. Every small sound, cars outside, the hum of the refrigerator, a creak in the walls, made my heart jump. My mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept imagining the specialist's face, the expression he might wear. I replayed conversations with the first doctor, analyzing every pause, every shift in tone, looking for signs I might have missed. By midnight, I was pacing the apartment, unable to sit still. My legs felt restless, my chest tight, my thoughts uncontrollable. They watched me from the couch, concern etched across their face. You're burning yourself out, they said softly. Come sit down. I can't, I snapped, though the tone wasn't meant for them. I feel like I can't breathe if I stop moving. They stood up and approached me slowly, as if I were a frightened animal ready to bolt. Then let's move together, they suggested. Come with me. They took my hand and gently led me to the balcony. The night air was cool and sharp, brushing against my skin like a quiet reminder that the world was bigger than the storm inside my mind. City lights flickered in the distance. Somewhere far below, a car door slammed. The breeze carried faint music from a nearby apartment. Normal sounds. Normal life. But I was far from normal. I leaned against the railing, trying to steady my breath. They stood beside me without speaking. A long silence stretched between us, comfortable for a moment, then suddenly unbearable. The pressure inside me reached a breaking point. What if tomorrow ruins everything? I whispered. What if they tell me it's the worst-case scenario? Their eyes softened, but they didn't try to sugarcoat it. If it is, then at least you'll know what you're fighting. Right now, the fear is fighting you, because it's filling every empty space. I shook my head, tears burning behind my eyes. I don't know if I can do this. You don't have to know, they said. You just have to show up tomorrow. That's all. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words dissolved as a wave of panic crashed over me so fiercely that my knees buckled. I gripped the railing with both hands, trying to steady myself. My breath came too fast, too shallow. My vision blurred around the edges. The world felt like it was tilting sideways, spiraling in on itself. Hey, they said nervously now, look at me. Look at me. I couldn't. Panic roared through me, drowning out everything else. My heart was pounding so violently that it felt like it would burst out of my chest. My hands trembled uncontrollably. A choked sound escaped my throat, part sob, part gasp. I can't. I tried to speak, but the sentence broke in half. I can't breathe. They gripped my shoulders firmly, grounding me. You're having a panic attack. You're not dying. You're safe. Breathe with me. Right here. Stay right here. Their voice anchored me, but barely. My body felt out of control, like I was being pulled underwater by forces I couldn't resist. I could feel tears streaming down my face, hot and relentless. My whole body shook. They placed one hand on my chest, the other on my back, guiding me gently. Slow breaths. In, 2, 3. Out, 2, 3. Just focus on my voice. You're okay. I'm right here. It took minutes, long, heavy minutes, before the panic loosened its grip enough for me to breathe without choking. When my senses finally returned, I collapsed forward, pressing my forehead against their shoulder. They held me without hesitation, one hand stroking the back of my head, the other keeping me close, like I might shatter if they let go. Why is this happening to me? I whispered, my voice raw. I feel like I'm losing my mind. You're not, they murmured. You're scared. And you've been holding everything inside for too long. But I shouldn't be this scared, I insisted weakly. I should be stronger than this. They pulled back just enough to look at me. Strength doesn't mean not being scared. It means being terrified and still taking the next step. Their words cracked something inside me, not with pain this time, but with a strange, gentle truth. Still, the aftermath of the panic left me drained, trembling, fragile in a way I had never felt before. They helped me inside and guided me to the couch. I didn't resist when they wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. You need sleep, they said, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. I won't be able to, I whispered. You will, they replied softly. I'll stay right here. I lay down, exhaustion settling into my bones. They sat on the floor beside the couch, leaning against it, close enough for me to feel their presence. My breathing gradually steadied. The tension in my muscles loosened. And slowly, against all expectations, I drifted into a shallow, restless sleep. I dreamed of shadows. Not dark, threatening shapes, but soft silhouettes, trees, clouds, people walking on distant roads. They weren't chasing me. They weren't trapping me. They were just there. Following. Waiting. When I woke before dawn, my heart was still heavy, but the panic had quieted. They were still there beside me, head tilted against the couch as they slept. I watched them for a moment, realizing that this was the breaking point, not the diagnosis, not the fear, but this night. This collapse. This moment of being utterly vulnerable. It felt like reaching the bottom of a long fall, touching the cold ground, and knowing the only direction left was up. In a few hours, I would sit in a waiting room again. I would hear words I couldn't predict. I would face whatever truth the tests revealed. But for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a faint hum of resilience under the fear, a fragile strength I hadn't known I still had. A strength built from breaking. And from being held when I did. Morning arrived too quickly, soft and gray, as if the sky itself hesitated to brighten. I drifted in and out of sleep, listening to the slow rhythm of their breathing beside the couch. For a moment, I lingered in that fragile stillness, the kind that exists only in the space between fear and action. Then the reality of the day pressed down on me. This was it. The day the uncertainty would become something solid. I sat up slowly. My body felt heavy, my limbs sluggish, as if I'd aged years overnight. They stirred awake almost instantly, rubbing their eyes before looking up at me with quiet concern. How are you feeling? I opened my mouth to lie, to say fine, or okay, or any of the other words people use to hide the truth. But something in me shifted. Maybe it was the collapse on the balcony, maybe it was the long night spent grappling with shadows, or maybe it was the simple fact of waking up to someone who stayed even when I fell apart. I'm scared, I said honestly. They nodded, standing up slowly. I know. But you're not going alone. Their certainty steadied me more than they realized. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was walking into the unknown completely unarmed. We got ready in silence. I showered, dressed, tied my shoes with trembling fingers. My movements were slow but deliberate, like someone preparing for a ritual. Before we left, I paused at the doorway, taking a deep breath that quivered on the way in. Ready? They asked gently. No, I admitted. But I'm going anyway. The clinic was already bustling when we arrived. People filled the waiting area, parents soothing children, elderly couples murmuring softly, a man tapping nervously on his phone. It struck me that every single person in that room was carrying something: fear, hope, exhaustion, pain. Sickness made the world strangely equal. We sat side by side. My leg bounced uncontrollably. They placed a hand lightly on my knee to steady it. I didn't pull away. The minutes crawled by. Then the nurse called my name. My heart lurched. I stood, legs stiff, body shaky. They rose with me, offering a small, reassuring smile. I'll be right here. It took everything in me to walk through that door. The specialist's office was brighter than the last one. A large window overlooked the city, and plants lined the windowsill, small, stubborn signs of life. The doctor, a woman with calm eyes and steady hands, greeted me with a warmth that surprised me. I know these past days must have been difficult, she said as I sat down. Let's go through everything carefully. She reviewed the scans, explained the procedures, described what they'd be looking for. Her voice was clear and steady, and for the first time, I felt like someone was guiding me instead of speaking over me. Then she paused, studying one of the images more closely. My stomach twisted. There is definitely an area here that we need to examine further, she said, pointing gently. But I want you to understand something, not every shadow is dangerous. Some are anomalies. Some are benign. Some are inflammation, scarring, even just imaging artifacts. I exhaled shakily. It wasn't hope exactly, but it wasn't doom either. She continued, we'll do the additional scans now. The results might take a few hours. You can wait here or leave and come back. I opted to wait. I didn't want the fear chasing me through the city streets again. The tests were uncomfortable but quick. When I returned to the waiting area, they stood immediately, wrapping me in a gentle embrace that I hadn't realized I needed. How are you feeling? They asked softly. Like I'm trapped in a slow-moving nightmare, I answered truthfully. We sat. We waited. Every minute felt like a drop of water falling steadily into an overflowing glass. At some point, I rested my head on their shoulder. It wasn't planned. It wasn't thought out. It just happened, like a muscle memory I didn't know I had. They intertwined their fingers with mine, and for once, I didn't pull away from the comfort. Hours passed. People came and went. Daylight dimmed. My stomach tightened each time the door opened, until finally, the nurse appeared with my file in hand. The doctor will see you now. My legs felt like they were made of glass. Fragile. Shaking. But I stood anyway. When the doctor closed the door behind us, she didn't waste time with preamble. She sat across from me, her expression calm, not grim, not overly cheerful. Neutral. Professional. But her eyes held a softness that made my pulse stutter. We got the results, she said gently. The world narrowed. The shadow is real, she continued. My heart sank so sharply I felt it physically. She raised a hand, as if anticipating the panic rising in me. But it is not what we feared. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. It is benign, she said. Non-cancerous. It still needs monitoring, possibly treatment, but it's not life-threatening. A sound escaped me, half sob, half exhale, weak and disbelieving. The relief hit so hard that it almost hurt. My shoulders trembled with the force of it, and tears blurred my vision. Not fear this time. Something else. The doctor smiled softly. You're going to be okay. When I stepped out into the hall, they looked up instantly, reading my expression before I said a word. Their face crumpled into pure, breathless relief. I let out a shaky laugh, or maybe a sob, and they wrapped me in their arms. I leaned into them, my whole body shaking as the weight I'd been carrying for days collapsed all at once. It's okay, they whispered against my hair. It's okay. You're okay. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed them. But beneath the relief, beneath the tears and trembling, a quiet truth settled inside me. Even if the results had been different, even if the news had been worse, I would not have faced it alone. And that changed something deep within me, something that would not disappear with the fear. Something that felt like the beginning of becoming whole again. The hours after the diagnosis felt surreal, almost dreamlike, yet sharper than anything I'd felt in days. Relief didn't wash over me all at once. It came in slow waves, each one leaving me lighter, but also unexpectedly fragile. It was as if my body and mind couldn't process the sudden release of fear after being clenched so tightly for so long. I kept replaying the doctor's words, benign, not life-threatening, you're going to be okay. Each repetition softened something inside me that had been knotted painfully tight. On the ride home, the world looked different. The sky was clearer than I remembered, the air cooler, the colors sharper. Even the traffic felt less hostile. They drove, glancing over at me every few minutes, checking if I was still breathing, still real, still here. I wasn't crying anymore, but tears kept pooling at the corners of my eyes, slipping down in quiet, unexpected moments. You're really okay, they said softly, almost as if reassuring themselves. I know, I whispered, though part of me still felt suspended in disbelief. I just can't believe it. They smiled gently. You don't have to believe it yet. Your body's still catching up. They weren't wrong. Relief was heavy, too, just a different kind of weight. It trembled inside me, fragile and raw. I had spent days preparing to face the worst, bracing myself for impact. And now that the storm had passed, my limbs felt weak, my mind hollowed out. When we reached my apartment, the world felt strangely still. I walked inside slowly, like I was entering a space I hadn't seen in years. Everything looked familiar, yet the air felt different, lighter, warmer, no longer suffocating. The anxiety, the constant dread, the sense of doom clinging to every object, it had lifted, even if not entirely. I'll make tea, they offered, heading to the kitchen as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I stood in the living room, looking around at everything I'd avoided these past days, the half-finished book on the table, the plants needing water, the blanket I'd wrapped myself in during those long nights of fear. Each item felt like a snapshot of someone else, someone trapped in uncertainty, struggling to breathe. I sat on the couch and exhaled slowly, feeling my lungs expand without tightness for the first time in days. The air no longer felt like it had to fight its way in. My hands, which had been trembling constantly, finally stilled. They joined me with 2 cups of tea, placing one gently in front of me. We sat in silence for a while, the steam curling into the air between us. For once, silence didn't feel threatening. It felt healing. You were so brave today, they said quietly. I let out a breathy laugh. I didn't feel brave. I felt like I was falling apart. Falling apart and still showing up, that's more courage than you think. Their words hit something tender in me. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from an unfamiliar warmth. Thank you, I murmured. They smiled, but there was something deeper behind it, something like pride, something like relief, something like care, in its purest form. At some point, I leaned back and closed my eyes. A moment later, I felt their hand gently cover mine. I didn't pull away. For days, I had needed their strength to stay upright, but now, for the first time, I felt my own strength returning, slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. As the afternoon faded into evening, we talked, really talked. About the fear. About the waiting. About the moments I'd nearly broken. I admitted things I hadn't said out loud before, the loneliness, the panic, the spiraling thoughts. And they listened without judgment, without trying to fix me, without promising things they couldn't promise. They just stayed. It changed me, I said softly, staring at the shadows on the wall. These days, everything I felt. I don't think I can go back to who I was before. Maybe you're not supposed to, they replied. Maybe this is the beginning of something new. The idea scared me at first. But then it settled inside me with a strange kind of peace. They were right. I couldn't go back. The fear had revealed cracks I didn't know existed, but it had also shown me strength I didn't know I had. Later, as they prepared to leave, they hesitated at the door. Call me if you need anything, they said softly. Even if it's just to sit in silence. I will, I promised, this time without hesitation. When the door closed behind them, my apartment was quiet again. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet from before. It was lighter, open. I walked to the window and looked out at the darkening sky. People walked below, cars passed, lights flickered in the buildings across the street. Life was still happening. And for the first time in days, I felt like I was part of it again. I wasn't completely okay, not yet. The fear had left its marks. But under it all, something steady and new was forming. A sense of resilience. A sense of gratitude. A sense of direction. I realized then that healing wasn't just about the diagnosis being benign. It was about everything I had faced to get there. Everything I had learned about myself, about vulnerability, about what it meant to be held when you couldn't hold yourself. The fear hadn't defeated me. It had transformed me. And in that quiet moment by the window, I felt the first true hint of peace. Soft, cautious, but undeniably real. In the days that followed, relief slowly settled into my bones, no longer sharp and overwhelming, but warm and steady, like sunlight seeping through a window after a long storm. The fear didn't vanish completely, not at first. It lingered in shadowed corners of my mind, slipping quietly into my thoughts at unexpected moments. A sudden quiet in the apartment, a tightness in my chest, a stray medical article online, these things could still pull me back toward the memory of those long, terrifying days. But something fundamental had changed. The fear no longer owned me. It was strange to wake up each morning and not immediately brace for the worst. My body, so used to tension, took time to relearn calm. But each day felt a little lighter. I found myself noticing things I had overlooked before, the way the morning light painted the walls gold, the comforting hum of the coffee maker, the quiet joy in small rituals. Even the sound of my own breathing felt different. Present. Steady. For the first time in a long time, I let myself rest. Real rest, not the restless kind where your mind runs laps around the same anxieties. I slept deeply. I ate without the knot in my stomach. I showered without rushing. I breathed without counting the seconds between each inhale and exhale. I also started talking more. Not just about the diagnosis, but about everything, the pressures I'd put on myself, the expectations I'd been carrying, the exhaustion I'd never admitted. I called my sibling and told them the whole story. They listened quietly, with a steadiness that made me feel safe in ways I hadn't felt in years. They were angry on my behalf, relieved for me. And proud that I had faced something so frightening. At work, I was honest with my manager. I didn't go into every detail, but I explained enough. They were far more understanding than I expected, and for the first time, I allowed myself to ask for space instead of pretending everything was fine. The world didn't collapse when I admitted I needed time. No one judged me. No one punished me. That realization alone felt transformative. As the days turned into a week, then too, the person I saw in the mirror began to change. Not physically, though the exhaustion in my eyes faded, but in something deeper. I didn't see the same version of myself that had walked into that first appointment weeks earlier. That person had been moving through life on autopilot, pushing, always pushing, pretending fear and doubt weren't there. This new version of me was different. I stood slower. Softer. Stronger in ways that didn't require pretending. The turning point came one quiet evening. I had gone for a walk alone, the first time I felt truly ready since everything happened. The sun was low, casting long shadows on the pavement. Families passed by, laughing, a couple held hands, a dog barked excitedly in the distance. The world felt gentle, almost tender. At the far end of the park, I stopped at a bench overlooking a small garden. Flowers I had never noticed before were blooming, deep purples, bright reds, soft whites. Colors I might have ignored in another life. I sat there for a long time, breathing in the cool evening air. And then it hit me. I had survived something I didn't fully understand, something that had shaken every part of me. I had faced my own mortality, not directly, but close enough to feel the tremor of it, and in the process, I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed. I had learned vulnerability wasn't weakness. That leaning on someone didn't diminish me. That breaking wasn't the end, it was the beginning. I realized I was grateful. Not for the fear. Not for the uncertainty. But for the way it had stripped me down to my core, revealing parts of myself I'd ignored for years. Parts that needed attention, compassion, change. When I returned home, they were sitting on my couch, reading. They looked up the moment I walked in, their eyes filled with that same gentle concern that had held me together during the darkest moments. "How are you?" they asked. For the first time, I didn't have to pause to think. I didn't have to force an answer. The truth rose naturally, steady and warm. "I'm good," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "Really good." Their relieved exhale made my chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with something softer, deeper. Gratitude. Connection. Maybe even the beginnings of love, though neither of us dared name it yet. They crossed the room and wrapped me in a quiet embrace. And I let myself lean into it fully, not out of fear, not out of desperation, but out of choice. When I pulled back, I realized something important. I wasn't returning to my old life. I was stepping into a new one. One where I didn't ignore warning signs. One where I didn't pretend to be invincible. One where I allowed myself to be seen, not just the polished, composed parts, but the fragile ones too. One where I no longer walked alone. The shadow in the scan had turned out to be harmless. But the shadow it cast on my life had shown me who I truly was. And who I was ready to become. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt whole. Not unscarred. But whole. And as I stood there in the quiet warmth of my apartment, I realized I was finally, unmistakably, alive.